Hey, good evening. Wow. The theme for today has been to adapt. So, headset here, not using it. Let me get the live stream links going. Whew. I am definitely looking forward to some of you. So, getting my devices together to share the link. All right. Crazy day today. Crazy day today. How's everyone doing? All right, tonight's topic is going to be lit. Getting my devices together and sharing. There we go. I see people joining. Hi, people. Good night. So, I'm thinking about doing a crypto course. If you are watching this after the live, I see people joining. Yay. If you are watching this after the live, let me know if you would be interested in a crypto course, something that covers the basics, because I have a lot of people that have been asking me questions about cryptocurrency. And it's one of the areas where I do have some exposure. I will not say that I'm an expert, but yeah, let's get to it. If you're interested in that, let me know. I'll pull something together. It wouldn't be like harassing you to comment at this point in time. You could just drop the comments afterwards. All right. So, what I am going to cover today as I get settled is compliance in crypto. I want to first thank all of you from watching wherever you may be in the world. And if you are joining me from someplace exotic other than the Virgin Islands, definitely drop it in the comment below. If you are watching from the Virgin Islands, definitely drop it in the comment below. If this is your first time on my channel, my name is Simone Martin, and I want to welcome you to the Sea of Regulation. I also want to give a huge thank you to all of my new subscribers. And if you're watching and not subscribed, please, please, please do so. It's free and it actually helps. So there is that. I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in live. It's just one of you so far, but we're going to make sure that we get the word around. So hit somebody up, tag them, let them know I'm finally live. If you're watching after the live stream, great, you can still comment. So a bit of background on me for the newbies. If you are brand new to the channel and you may not know me or you may not have had the opportunity to talk to me directly, I am a financial services regulator and I've been working in that position for over 21 years. You can find more about me on my LinkedIn page, and the company's LinkedIn page is in the description below. So I'm just getting started. So share this with anyone interested in cryptocurrency, compliance, and current events, because that's what we're covering tonight. So now that I have one or two of you here, let's look at what we're going to be covering tonight. Tonight, we're going to be looking at a snapshot of the existing regulatory framework for crypto business. And we're going to then clarify some of the misconceptions in and around crypto and fintech. And then there's FTX. It's the sexy case study that's still being written. And I've been getting so many questions. So I said, well, why not a live? Why not a live? So that we can have the interaction. And I've been away from the lives for a bit. I was under the weather. I'm back now, and I'll have a live next week. So a little earlier, but definitely let's get this show going. And let me get my disclaimers out of the way. I am a financial services regulator. I am not a lawyer and I am not a professional advisor. And the views on this channel are definitely all my own and do not represent the views of any regulatory authority or international standard setting body. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive in. So today's live is going to launch into compliance and crypto. And this is not the first live or even the first video where I've covered crypto. A few weeks ago, I had my KYC masterclass series and I dealt with eKYC in a live. But there are also some prior videos on the FATF Travel Rule. We'll get into what that is in a minute, and what cryptos I am into, NFTs or non-fungible tokens, and whether they should be regulated, and a few more videos. And I've put links to all of those in the description below. Now, before I jump into the first element of tonight's discussion, let me say up front that when I use the word crypto, I'm actually including a wider population of innovative businesses that can be commonly grouped as innovative solutions in financial services. So your fintech. And I'm familiar with the differences between cryptocurrencies, proof of stake, proof of work, proof of authority, decentralized finance or DeFi, DEXs, dApps, NFTs, and a few other elements in the ecosystem. I will also say that I am not a technologist and I don't know everything. Let me just put that right out there. My expertise is in financial services regulation, and I've been applying that a bit of a design thinking approach to the crypto space for a few years. In my prior position, when I was the deputy director of the Anguilla Financial Services Commission, I had an opportunity to help legislative reform, and I got to really engage with, experts in blockchain analytics firms, academia, lots of people. And that has helped me tremendously. I also did a program with Cambridge Judge Business School, and all of those things have helped to round me out. Like I said, I don't know everything, but I think I might know enough to help further the discussion in a positive and fact-based way. So it's worth repeating as well that these are my views. There's a lot of chatter around regulation and regulators and crypto and whether we want it or not. And, there are a lot of views. These are my views. And they're not the views, just as I said in the disclaimer, they're not the views of any regulatory authority or international standard setter. And I really do want that to be clear for this particular video, because with the current events, it's going to be a bit of a hot button issue. So I just want that to be clear. Right? Now, so from my perspective, the application of regulation to crypto is akin to, say, a master chef getting a challenge on the cooking show Chopped. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I like that show. So the chefs are brought in, they're given these ingredients, they don't know what they're going to do beforehand, they have a limited time to do it in, and applying your existing regulatory framework is like that bag of ingredients, and you have a very short time frame in which to do it as a regulator. And regulators around the world are in the kitchen with these new ingredients, i.e. crypto, on the world stage, and having to meet the challenge of crafting something that is palatable. And palatable in regulator speak reduce as much friction as, well, not reduce, because regulation does introduce a bit of friction in many cases, but you don't want to overregulate. And I am a big proponent of not overregulating. It needs to be right touch regulation. And so regulators are challenged to do all of this in a very tight timeline, tighter than is ideal. Now, some people might be thinking, but Bitcoin has been around for over a decade. And I'm familiar with Bitcoin because we share a birthday, October 31st. And so Bitcoin, the white paper for that was drafted about 14 years ago. And in tech terms, I get it. That is like several generations. But when it comes to regulation and development of regulation, that's not that long. Think about it. Insurance as a sector, banking as a sector, trust business as a sector, and as industries have been around for centuries. And there's still countries around the world that don't even fully regulate trust business beyond AML CFT provisions. So imagine now having to deal with not just AML for the fintech space, but prudential supervision, market conduct. And we are seeing the market sensitivities with all the different, the Celsius, the Voyager, and FTX. So I wanted to give some context with that. And regulation tends to develop um, as you see the risks and you understand the risks. So fintech has been moving fast and breaking things and having a grand old but we're going to get into some of the misconceptions why there's so much misinformation and negativity around and misconceptions around crypto. Because, yeah, there's a lack of certain clear regulatory requirements in certain areas and in certain parts of the world. But know that these issues are ever present in the mind of central bankers, regulators, and law enforcement authorities. I've also publicly said in another forum about, it was more than a year ago, that the dialogue between innovators and regulators did not get off to the best of start. You had innovators who were like, well, down with the regulators. We're not about that. We've designed Bitcoin to go against all of these things. And I get it. Some of these things came from the place of pain and real pain to real people after the fallout from the global financial crisis, which was also about 2008. And thankfully, what I've seen more recently is that the dialogue has changed, and I am happy for one to see a lot more collaboration. So I've provided a bit of context in terms of my views, my position, where this is going tonight. And I'm a firm believer that context is critical. And maybe I can provide you with some new perspectives. So let's get into the first thing for tonight, a snapshot of the existing regulatory frameworks for crypto businesses. Now, international standard setters and supranational organizations like the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, and the Bank of International Settlements, BIS, they have been hard at work. Now, FATF is the international standard setter for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing and proliferation financing. People forget that PF. And they've been, of course, doing work to look at the space, and they've been engaging in a lot of private public sector dialogue to help advance the documents that they've put out. And the Bank of International Settlement have several streams of work, including a few projects being led by their innovation hub. I believe it's based in Singapore. They have also published various documents on payment systems and other aspects of the fintech space that are worth reading. Now, of course, I've covered FATF Travel Rule in prior video, which is focused on the customer due diligence or know your customer element of the transfer and exchange of digital assets. And the service providers, that they term them as virtual asset service providers. So you'll see that in a lot of laws that are being developed. Now, I touched on that guidance a few times because it has been updated, but personally, I've also worked with other bodies, and some of the work that I was privy to was it a year or two ago? I think maybe it's been a bit of a while, and that's in the description below too. It emerged a group of persons who wanted to make sure that there was a clearer understanding of what the travel rule meant to persons who might not have been in the traditional financial services space or even the traditional compliance space or compliance at all. They did some work to really delve into the travel rule and out from under, I would say, the auspices of a blockchain analytics firm called CipherTrace, and which was recently acquired by MasterCard, evolved the Travel Rule Information Sharing Alliance, or TRISA. And they've been doing important work to increase the adoption of the travel rule by virtual asset service providers, and also published a guidance document in the description below. Now, there are also collaborative groups outside of traditional standard setters. And one standout example that I tend to look to from the outside looking in, that I see as doing really good work, is the Global Financial Innovation Network. That is made up of financial regulators and similar bodies from around the world. You can look up the membership, also link in the description. The mandate of GFIN is to support financial innovation and in the best interest of consumers. That's pulled from their website. And that's a common goal of regulators around the world, regardless as to whether there's fair mongering or demonizing of regulatory bodies, know that we shouldn't all be painted with the same brush. And at the core of our being, we do want the best outcomes for what is happening in the financial ecosystem as it relates to fintech and crypto. Um, is there a bit of need for shifts in mindsets? Of course, because and the mindset discussion is one that is near and dear to my heart, because I sit in a jurisdiction that many people think they know about when it comes to regulation, and they have no clue. Now, many people will think that regulators are slanted against crypto and other innovations, but looking at the global moves, I would say that this is not the case. And what I love about GFIN is that the membership is truly diverse. It's not a group of, say, G7 regulators and then everybody else is straggling along. It is really diverse and from all regions of the world. So, they have the depth and the breadth of discussions and learnings within their organization. And I think they're going to begin publishing even more documents so that that learning can go even outside of the membership. Now, there's much more in terms of global discussions to develop regulation. And from the global discussions, you have the development of national regulatory concepts. And there are some countries that get tons of attention. The USA is definitely one, Singapore is another, and of late, the Bahamas. Let me remind everyone of two things. FTX is not the first crypto-centric scandal, and it definitely won't be the last. The second thing is, it's also worth reminding you that the Bahamas was the first country in the world to launch a CBDC, which is a central bank digital currency. Caribbean countries have often punched above their weight class because we have to. Okay, we have to. We cannot sit down and say, all right, we're going to just rest on our laurels and not get it done. We have to. So it's one of the areas that, again, there are a lot of misconceptions and people are not sure of the system, not going to be speaking directly. Well, let me just get to finish up some of the regulatory regimes. So when I look at some regulatory regimes that are outside of the Caribbean, and I'm being very purposeful in not including the Caribbean because that could be a whole other video, and I might leave, actually, I think I will leave that for my membership. Prior video, Chasing Compliance, there's a membership link in the description below, but tonight is not about the membership. If you're interested, feel free to message and all of that and jump in, but there's content that is exclusive to the membership. But focusing on some of the regulatory regimes that stood out for me outside of the Caribbean, definitely Singapore. I have been ghosting Singapore for almost 14 years. I love the Monetary Authority of Singapore's approach to regulation generally. So when it came to the point that there was something new on the block, I was definitely all over Singapore's Mass's website. And they tend to be leaders. They tend to be thoughtful. I know that they also have an interesting history. And in a lot of conferences that I've had the opportunity to present at, and looking at the future of some of the Caribbean jurisdictions, I speak about a Singaporean transformation if we could leverage our capacities in a manner similar to Singapore. There are lessons to be learned from Singapore beyond regulation, but that's enough about me gushing about a country on the other side of the planet. Another jurisdiction that I find is really good when it comes to their financial services development and kind of came out like a dark horse in my mind was Abu Dhabi. Shocking, I know. But it was like, to me, it was interesting. It was really interesting that Abu Dhabi had taken a really good approach in relation to the digital asset recognition, and then they were very purposeful in terms of what businesses they were going to look at. In the Channel Islands, there's Gibraltar and Guernsey that stand out for me. Well, Gibraltar is, right there by Spain, but kind of see them as next to crown dependencies in my mind's eye. And Guernsey I think is not getting enough credit for the leadership role that they play. I do know that they have a lot of traction within GFIN as well. And they might, people tend to look to Jersey, which is not the United States state of New Jersey, Jersey, the country. In the Channel Islands. People tend to look to Jersey, but I think Guernsey is really a standout performer. Their Financial Services Commission is doing great things as it relates to the digital asset space. And like I said, they're a member of GFIN. They have certain leadership roles. There's certain things that they developed in the regulatory ecosystem prior to fintech being so popular that I think helped them with that leadership as well. Again, back a little further on the other side of the planet is Malaysia. Malaysia is really leveraging all of the linkages and the capacity that they have, especially as it relates to payment systems, is one of the areas that I think that they've focused on, but they've focused on a number of other areas within the fintech space. And then I cannot ignore the continent of Africa. Two standout countries within the continent of Africa for me are Kenya. Kenya has been making a lot of strides since the 2010s in the fintech space. Before this was really a global discussion, and Nigeria as well. Their central bank is really throwing a lot of muscle and capacity behind everything. From what I could see, everything like payments, exchanges, everything. And this is not a political channel, so we're not getting into the political discussions on any particular country. We're just looking at who have some standout regulatory regimes as it relates to crypto businesses. And remember, crypto businesses, for the purposes of this discussion, is very expansive. Now, if you know your geopolitics, I do try to stay away from it. But if you know your geopolitics, you will notice that not one of these countries is a member of the G20. From my personal observations, it is the smaller jurisdictions that tend to be more agile and responsive. So think of turning a tight corner in a sports car versus an 18-wheeler. In the face of innovation, the agile regulators are the ones who are winning. Remember my comment about punching above our weight? These are some of the things that we're looked at, and when I say we, I've worked in jurisdictions that are deemed very small regulators in comparison to G20 countries, but you have to build a wide breadth of capacity in all of your staff when you are in this position. Now, you also have to be progressive in you're wanting to make sure that you protect your economy. Systemic risks can hit you harder, but there are a lot of wins that regulators have in these smaller jurisdictions that are not that well known. It's not necessarily going to be picked up by New York Times or Forbes, but I'm picking it up here. And so, it is one of the things that I think is important for me to have this discussion, as well as the continuing misinformation about smaller jurisdictions, as well as misinformation in the crypto space. There are a lot of falsehoods that still persist, which neatly sets me up for my next topic. So clarifying some of the misconceptions in and around crypto. I don't have any comments as yet, but that's okay. We can always take the comments offline, and that's fine. So clarifying some of the misconceptions in and around crypto and fintech. One of the biggest misconceptions is that crypto is evil and should be avoided. This is not true. And I've often said in relation to traditional financial services regulation that there's no such thing as a good or bad company, just good or bad people. I've said that in a recent live where we were looking at corporate structures and people talking about, oh, this jurisdiction is a tax haven and shady deals and transparency and all of that. Here's a fun fact: criminals lie. And they are not necessarily going to be truthful to say, hey, I'm going to set this up to steal all of your money. And that's a segue for later, but we'll get to that. So just as there are good or bad people, cryptocurrencies and more broadly digital assets, which are intangible, we can't hold them in our hands. And I was going to have my Ledger Nano to say, can we? But, I have like two of them. But think of it as a thing, and it's not good or bad. It's what people do with them. So, no, cryptocurrency is not evil. Another misconception is that there's more money laundering and terrorist financing that is happening through the use of cryptocurrency. And hard evidence is pointing to this also not being the case. The beauty of cryptocurrency lies in the fact that blockchain technology means that records will exist forever. And there have been people who have made comments on some of my past videos about privacy coins. I actually know blockchain analytics experts. You can debate me all day on this. I'm not going to debate you. I'm just going to leave law enforcement to use the tricks of their trade because they're the experts on that. They can trace through blockchain 1,000 times better than paper currency from what I am getting. Don't use that statistic against me. It's not, a real ratio. But recent successes from law enforcement agencies can quantify the crypto seized, quantify the value of crypto linked to crimes, and quantifying the monies, actual fiat money connected to crime, not involving crypto, is often comprised of actual seizures and estimates. So there are a lot of reports that estimates how much money is laundered, estimates how much money is going into terrorist financing. But there's so much misinformation there about cryptocurrencies that people and certain projects that people are thinking, well, Simone, what do we do? Like, how do we know this? So I said it early in the beginning. I'll say it again just in case you're jumping in now and you've not watched from the beginning. I am thinking about doing a basic course, like a very simple course for people who really are interested in the source. They see, terabytes, petabytes of information, and they don't know where to sift. I think I'm a trusted source, but no, I would distill things for everyone, have a series of lives just for that. There would be a paywall for something like $5 or $10 minor in the grand scheme of things, because I want people who are serious. So yeah, I'm thinking about it. If you're thinking that might be a good idea, let me know in the comments. Let me know on my LinkedIn page, something. Now, I could spend tons of time here, but you might be thinking, blah, 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 let's get to FTX already. And I'll do just that. Other misconceptions are in a free downloadable on my website. Opt-in is the end of the website address, and the link is in the description below. So I figure that, if you're tuning in, you're probably thinking, yeah, I want all the juice on FTX. And so we'll get there in about 60 seconds. So if you're finding this helpful, please share this video with your friends. And if you haven't already, like the video so we can help more people get better clarity on compliance and crypto issues. That is, if it doesn't impact you yet, it's coming, because crypto is going to be global very soon. So we are looking at the current case study that's still being written, FTX. Now, why do I call it a case study being written? Usually when there's a crisis, you have a lot of learnings after that. Any crisis. I know Winston Churchill said never waste a crisis, but even during the crisis, you can have learning so that you don't have the situation happen to you. Again, I will repeat, FTX is not a Bahamas problem or a US problem. And I said that somewhere else, but it's good or bad, people. But there's so many lessons to learn from all that is happening, and it's not just in relation to the development of regulation. Although some people are diving in on that point to say, oh, this wouldn't have happened if there was regulation. This case will help some people appreciate the scope and scale of how quickly things can go wrong in the crypto space. And what I will not be covering here, there's no comment on the regulatory regimes that are front and center. And those are the United States of America and the Bahamas. I'm not covering their regulatory regimes. I am a regulator. I am not I've never regulated in those jurisdictions. So I am not going to pretend to be an expert. I can tell you from an international perspective certain things, and that's what we're going to cover. Now, as I said before, FTX is not the first scandal, and it will not be the last. I've watched some parts of the US congressional hearings on FTX. I saw Kevin O'Leary. I'm ignoring that completely. Kevin O'Leary is an interested party. He has skin in the game. His testimony to me would be colored from that fact. And so when I'm looking at the information that's coming out, other than the filings in relation to the arrest of SBF, um, I'm looking more so at the testimony of Mr. John J. Ray III, who was the receiver who wound up Enron. That's his main fame, but he's had other experiences and exposures. But he set out his findings to the U.S. Congressional hearing. Was it yesterday or the day before? I can't. The days are falling together. And some of the things that stood out to me was his view of the absolute concentration of control by unsophisticated and inexperienced persons. That might not be a direct quote, but it's very much close to what he said in some of his opening statements. They spoke about using QuickBooks and the lack of financial statements and the financial records not being reliable. They spoke about there was no separation of internal controls. So no controls were in place. And when it comes to cryptocurrencies, of course, not your keys, not your crypto. And so you have them centralized, and you have multi-sig keys that are used by other platforms to ensure that there's security, and you can't have one bad actor just, abscond with the money. They talked about commingling of customers' assets, and crypto assets, we're going to treat them as assets between FTX and Alameda. And the persons are saying, oh, well, SBF also had Alameda. No, 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 no. It's a separate legal entity. Treat them as separate people. And we're going to get into some of the things that exist that should be that stand out to me as a regulator, right? There was no risk management function. SBF was out and about doing interviews every other day. Well, no, every single day since this all broke. Some say it was an apology tour. I was kind of stunned by it. Some people said, he was framing his position so that he could get leniency. But in one of those interviews, I think he said something about doing risk management in his head. Then there was a clip with a past video of Carolyn Ellison talking about, she's doing risk management in her head and simple math. And I'm like, okay, these people went to MIT, and I did not go to an Ivy League university, but I have done calculus and advanced calculus. And I'm like, that it's a lot of hubris is involved in this, and that is my personal opinion. But let's get back to what Mr. Ray was saying. He said poor record keeping, and I was like, all of the alarms went off, and I'm like, DEFCON 1, let's go. This is live, this is nuclear. The internal loans to employees was another issue. It was a lot. And what he said that he could distill in a short period of time was stunning to me. It was absolutely stunning. This based on his testimony, this isn't a crypto issue. So let me tell you that first and foremost, FTX and its failure and its current situation and the saga as it continues, it is not a crypto issue at all. It is not a fintech issue. It is not a crypto issue. It is not a digital asset issue. It is a case of fraud, malfeasance, and mismanagement. That is my opinion based on evidence that has been put forward. And that includes the indictments that have been filed. Now, Mr. Ray had tons of detail in his almost 4-hour-long testimony, but I'll go over a few points that stood out for me. I don't want to make this too long because, we can continue the discussion in another live. But corporate governance, this has been a sticking point for me for a number of years. Fun fact, I went and made sure that I got some training on that with the Chartered Governance Institute. They have branches around the world, excellent stuff. But beyond that, that training helped me to really appreciate how critical governance is in relation to any firm, regulated or not. And so in the regulated space, key persons, this is something, I knew about, of course, I've been dealing with this for over 2 decades. Key persons like directors and chief executive officers, and now in the fintech space, chief technology officers. Of course, you have chief compliance officers, and others are subject to a fit and proper test. And the governance at FTX was essentially non-existent. Now, one of the things that I would want to highlight to everyone, it's important to understand that corporate governance and management are not equivalent terms. The management of a company deals with the day-to-day operations, the implementation of what their objective, like why are you in business? That's what the management is doing. Strategy is directed, the strategy is developed and directed by the board, and the board will make sure that there's this healthy tension between management and the board, and there's reporting. I think I did a live on this, but there's reporting by management to the board to make sure that things are happening as they should. The overlap of a director's function and manager's functions will occur for smaller organizations. I don't expect that to occur for $1 billion company at all, at all. But the distinction between governance and management is one of the areas where I think regulators are also drilling down on. Prior to the FTX thing, regulators have been drilling down because, again, it's not good or bad companies, it's good or bad people. So I've said it in past videos that regulators are going to focus on those bad actors and crack down their enforcement action on people. In the case of FTX, oh yeah, I see that happening as well, because it is so just egregious. It's extreme. Like, the scale of this is just ridiculous. You know, the effective oversight of a director is also something in common law jurisdictions. Like, if you fail at that, if you fail at your fiduciary duty, there can be consequences. Now, I said I'm not a lawyer, and in some cases they're bad, but I have looked at a little case law. There might be charges directly against directors, and they might have civil actions being brought against them in certain cases. I don't know whether this will apply to this case. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer. There are lawyers who are probably looking at this particular issue. But the FTX case places a huge spotlight on the need for good governance. And this, to me, is the biggest issue that contributed to FTX case and its downfall, in my opinion. Not CZ, not him. He may have, his actions might have exposed the fact that the malfeasance and the fraud was going on at the extent it was going on, right? Another regulatory requirement that clearly was not necessarily worked out. And, there's a lot of discussion in the crypto space about it, like liquidity and reserves, and proof of reserves is one of the other areas that people in the crypto space, they're skittish. People are having knee-jerk reactions. They want to know that whomever they're invested in, they're safe. There are reasons why some of these things might not be disclosed to the public, but they will be disclosed to a regulator, typically, in my mind. I'm not regulating crypto, people. But to my mind, it is a framework that exists. Now, going back to the governance issue and the fit and proper test that regulators apply to key persons. In the fintech space, this is going to present its own unique challenge. And I touched on this recently in, I think, a past YouTube short. You might have a young man, woman, gender neutral, seeking to be a CEO of a crypto project. And they've been coding since they were a preteen. They have this brilliant idea. It's great. They're now in their 20s, they're 20-something, and investors are behind them, throwing buckets of money to launch this project. And this young person has a lot of experience in this particular innovation, but no track record that would allow for demonstrable senior level experience in leadership. And that's something that would be more readily found in traditional financial services space. But what does that leadership and experience look like in fintech? And maybe that's a discussion for the fintech community to have in earnest. I'm not going to cast aspersions on persons showing up to meetings in short pants. It happens every day in Bermuda. That is part of their culture. They're professionally dressed, they wear their shorts and things. It's not necessarily the dress that disturbs me. It's that in a lot of the past videos that have been playing on YouTube and different content creators' websites, is that in all of the discussions that I've seen of past prior to the FTX collapse, I've not heard depth from SBF. I wasn't paying attention to FTX prior. I did my due diligence, and I'm happy with the exchanges, the main exchange that I use. And there's a video on what crypto. I have crypto. I hold crypto both on exchanges and on my Ledger Nano. And I have views. I've done the due diligence, and I know as a regulator what I'm comfortable with in relation to an exchange. And I've said that, like I said, go and watch the video, find out what crypto I like, find out which exchange I like. But it's not CZ and Binance that caused that collapse. It wasn't. It was not. If you are also watching this and thinking, okay, Simone, you have some really interesting opinions, it's hard to apply the fit and proper test. But let me say quickly that it's one of the facets of a regulatory check for any regulated entity. So this is not something unique for fintech. It's just that the fintech ecosystem adds a layer to it that you might not necessarily see otherwise. I'll also add that genius does not translate to leadership. And in past videos, one of the jobs that I think regulatory authorities will have to hire for is a behavioral scientist. Comment below on what your views are in relation to the governance. I've really dived into the governance discussion quite a bit here. And I think that the governance discussion is definitely one that will have its own case study developed. Now, internal controls. The lack of internal controls is another huge factor in the FTX case. No control over customer assets, commingling of assets between FTX and Alameda. Regulations exist in other places, and it's like so stale, it's dusty. And people might say it's analog, but no, 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 no. It applies to the fintech space too. Segregation and safekeeping of clients' assets are basic principles. It doesn't matter what you think about the lack of regulatory clarity. If you're going to be holding peanuts for people, are you going to say, or rocks, sea rocks, how are you safeguarding them from being stolen, from being used in concrete, from being, whatever the planted and or sold or roasted, like whatever the asset is, it could be beads, but it's digital assets. You're supposed to have segregation. So I know what Jim gave me, I know what Jane gave me, I know what, and I have them segregated. And so when I give back Jim his thing, I'm not giving him some of Jane's stuff, which is essentially Ponzi scheme type vibes. So the principles are there. Separation and span of control of key persons. There were no, like, people had access to the money. And what is this with loan? Like, who gives billion-dollar loans? Anyways, third-party engagements require agreements and disclosures. And you're probably saying, well, what third party? We're still learning the case. But Alameda, even if it has common directorship, ownership, or origin, it's a separate legal entity. Where are the contracts? And people are given their routing numbers, so there's no disclosures to the client to say, okay, well, we don't have this. We're going to give you this information to pay to Alameda on behalf. No, there wasn't any of that. And then outsourcing and custody agreements. So if it is that you had a company holding onto crypto assets, so all of these things would be in existence in a well-run organization. You'd also have risk management strategies and not risk management strategies. Well, you've had documented risk management strategies and not things that are in somebody's head. So here's my take. Lots of people chime in about the lack of regulatory clarity. I'll use a music analogy. If you played an instrument or sang, it's more akin to transposing a sheet of music for one instrument to a next. Of course, you might have to tweak some notes. So if you play a flute, there will be a lot. Sometimes you might have a lot of movement and you transpose it to a bass instrument. There's not that much movement in the score. If you're writing the music, there might not be that much much movement. So you might have longer notes and, to help make the chords and everything. Great. But think about from that perspective to tweak what exists for the digital space. Now, any crypto operation needs to have a compliance manual, plus those manual of internal controls to deal with all those things I just mentioned. And for every jurisdiction, I find that, again, FATF is out there. So you have that AML CFT requirement for the travel rule, right? So your KYC information, your CDD information. But for every jurisdiction that you operate in, those manuals need to be drafted to make sure that they meet the laws and regulations of those relevant countries of operation. Now, the compliance manual, to my mind, is not just AML CFT. It includes sanctions compliance. And one of the things that when Mr. Ray said that there wasn't record keeping, I'm like, how many sanctions were breached? How many? Do we even know? How many financial crimes? Now, it might be a whole different equation if it is that SBF was taking crypto from bad actors. I want to use the M word and I want to use the T word, but I'm going to use those words. But if you're from a 5-letter organization, criminal organization, or a 6-letter organization beginning with a C word, and they were looking for their money, he might have different problems than just being in jail in the Bahamas. You ever thought about that? Because if he didn't know who he was just taking money and using the money, think about what happens if, and this is completely theoretical, I do not know if this is actually the case, but there was basically poor to non-existent record keeping. But think about the consequences to persons behind FTX if it were that they took $500 million in crypto assets from bad actors and they're kind of not happy with you. That could happen. Yeah, record keeping is really a big one. But when you develop your compliance manual, there's so many other facets that you have to consider that would fall under statutory compliance. So your reporting requirements. Another one that stands out to my mind is like reporting STRs and SARs. If you don't have a compliance manual and documented procedures, how do you comply with that? In the USA, I believe that reporting would be to FinCEN. And the risk management facet could also be included in the compliance manual or in a separate risk assessment framework. So you can have some light treatment of the risk element in the compliance manual and a whole separate documented risk assessment framework that looks at risks that impact your type of business, risks from the client portfolio, how you're going to apply that and all of that. And so remember, in the context of FATF, the travel rule has to address all of these things, and it will be applicable to FTX as well. The typologies and risks that have been borne out in the FATF guidance for virtual asset service providers impact cryptocurrency exchanges as a virtual asset service provider, and they're covered quite extensively. So the required reporting to whomever the regulator may be and other obligations under the law have to be captured and adhered to. Now, the onboarding process, again, I was just mentioning like what happens if it is that he was on board, like SBF and crew were onboarding bad actors. Anyways, they speak about poor record keeping, lack of financial records, and I mentioned the QuickBook elements for a multi-billion-dollar company. One of the things that I found, why I was comfortable looking at Mr. Ray's testimony is that he gave a lot of measured statements. There wasn't hyperbole. When he didn't know, he said he did not know. Is that, there's more information that's going to be gathered and presented in the coming days. And his observation on the lack of oversight and the lack of experienced managers, I think, is going to continue to be a common thread for everything that comes out after this. It has not been my experience that anything operating from within the Caribbean larger than a mom and pop shop could operate without a board of directors. And I do remember on Twitter seeing someone publishing who the directors were, and that SBF himself in one of the Twitter space interviews saying that there were maybe too many boards and not enough, so the evidence of a board being present could be another massive issue. Why? Gross negligence is kind of serious. and it could result in even more actions being taken. But I'd say let's see what else emerges. However, I think one of the takeaways, again, I reiterate, the whole FTX thing is not a crypto issue. Crypto is not bad or good. It is people. Mr. Riss set out that this was, I think he said, not a sophisticated fraud, but old school or old tactics embezzlement. So when people are casting aspersions against regulators in whichever jurisdiction, I think that they should really stop, because it is all well and good. You know what? Yeah, he's saying poor record keeping and thing, and I'm saying that a manual needs to exist, and they're saying no oversight and board of directors. What happens if all of these things, all of these documents actually did exist, but they were just there for to be paperweights or window dressing, or taking up space on somebody's server but not being used, because you can have that happen too. So I think one of the takeaways from his testimony as well was that he said the regulators, because somebody asked about the offshore customers and whether that would have, and this was a congressional hearing again, the offshore customers and what impact it would have on the US customers, and the actions being taken. But he said that the regulators are working together towards a common goal, and that they're familiar with each other. Let's go back to GFIN. Look at your GFIN membership. It's worth looking at. Regulators do work together, and so there's a lot of speculation. There might be a lot of knee-jerk reactions. Persons are It's a sexy case, don't get me wrong. I'm thinking like Netflix is going to pick this up, and we'll be seeing a Netflix movie. There's a producer and director or somebody who announced that they were in the Bahamas like days after the scandal broke. So I definitely see like Netflix, HBO, somebody fighting for the rights to this story, because I mean it's almost like you can't make this stuff up. But regulators do work together. Again, these are my views. Don't take this away as gospel. But I will end it here tonight. I am going to continue the discussion in my membership. Next week, I'll have a special live, and I might have an additional live before the holidays. But subscribe and make sure you check the community page often. Don't forget your free downloadable in relation to the misconceptions on crypto. I am thinking about what other offerings to help compliance professionals, another free something. And I'll definitely be looking forward to engaging with you in my next live. And subscribe, share, and I'll be back. And thank you all.